This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty wild idea. What if one of the most important philosophical movements in history wasn't born in some quiet, dusty library, but was actually forged in the fire of total national humiliation?
So, what on earth does military defeat have to do with philosophy? I mean, usually, right, we think of philosophy as this, quiet academic thing, totally detached from the real messy world. But what if a nation's biggest, most brilliant philosophical moments were actually a direct response to getting absolutely crushed on the battlefield? Well, that is the story of Germany.
Okay, so to really get why Germany's story is so weird, we first got to look at what philosophy's normal job was in other big European countries. This is going to set the stage for something totally different. All right, so think of it this way. In most of Europe, philosophy was basically the original liberal arts degree, right? It was the foundation for a good education. If you were in Britain or France, you studied philosophy to learn logic, ethics, how to think critically. But it was just a starting point. It was like a mental toolkit you'd use to go on and do the real work in fields like law or science. So you've got these countries, Britain and France, where their whole identity is built on solid, concrete stuff. Parliaments, laws, long-standing traditions. Philosophy? Yeah, it was there, it was part of the culture, but it wasn't the glue holding the whole country together. But then you have Germany. Germany didn't really have that solid foundation. So it found itself needing something way bigger from its philosophers. Not just some classes on logic, they needed a blueprint for the entire nation's soul.
So, the German exception. What was it that pushed Germany down this totally unique path? Why did it look at its philosophers and say, hey, forget teaching ethics, we need you to literally build us a reason to exist?
Well, the catalyst was national crisis. We're talking total, absolute humiliation. In the early 1800s, Napoleon's armies just rolled over the German lands. And they didn't just conquer territory, they completely shattered the German sense of self. See, this wasn't just a military defeat, it was an existential crisis. They were forced to ask, if we're not this collection of weak, fractured, defeated states, then who are we? What even unites us?
You just can't fix that kind of problem by building a new army or changing the tax code. It doesn't work. The wound was deeper. It was ideological. The German state needed a really powerful, unifying story to explain why it should even exist. It basically needed a whole new operating system for the national mind, a reason for being that it could present to the rest of the world.
So this is how you end up building a nation with ideas. This desperate need for a national story, well, it created a really unique kind of market. Not a market for stuff, but a market for huge, all-encompassing ideas. And guess what? There were some philosophers who were more than ready to step up and meet that demand. And this is where a guy like Hegel comes into the picture. See, thinkers like him didn't just offer up little tidbits of wisdom. No, they built what we now call system philosophy. Just imagine a giant, super detailed blueprint designed to explain everything: history, art, religion, and most importantly, the state, and show how it was all part of one single logical unfolding story. This was philosophy as a literal engine for building a nation.
But here's the really crazy part. This whole thing wasn't a one-off. This link between getting defeated and then needing philosophy to make sense of it all, it became a repeating pattern in German history. Philosophy fueled by defeat.
I mean, just look at this timeline. The pattern is crystal clear. You've got 1807, Napoleon crushes them, and suddenly there's a huge demand for a system like Hegel's to rebuild the whole idea of the state. Fast forward a century to 1918. The trauma of World War I creates a brand new demand, but this time for an existential philosophy like Heidegger's, something that could give voice to all that national anxiety. And then you get to 1945. A defeat so absolute, it didn't just create a new demand, it completely shattered the whole system.
Okay, so if crisis is the fuel for this kind of philosophy, what happened during times of peace and stability? Did the state still need some grand unifying theory? Well, the short answer is nope, not really.
And you can see the difference so clearly here. On one hand, you've got a period of stability, and you have this philosopher, Husserl, who's worried about an academic crisis. He's worried that philosophy is losing its status as the queen of the sciences inside the university. It's basically an internal turf war. Now compare that to Heidegger right after World War I. His philosophy took off not because of some academic debate, but because it spoke directly to this deep national feeling of anxiety and loss. The demand for his ideas was coming from the very soul of a traumatized nation.
So you have this really unique, intense relationship between the state and its philosophers. It was powerful, for sure, but it was also incredibly fragile. Because it was built on crisis, it was always destined to be destroyed by the biggest crisis of them all. This is the system's final crash. Yep, 1945. This was not just another defeat you could process with a new philosophical system. This was a complete and total collapse. Moral, ethical, institutional, you name it. It was the event that finally broke the entire model.
I mean, just think about the core idea for a second. For more than 100 years, this whole philosophical project rested on one single premise, that the German state was the highest, most rational point of all human history. But after the absolute horrors of World War II, that idea wasn't just incorrect, it was a grotesque, sick joke. The entire foundation for this way of thinking had just been burned to the ground.
And that's how the whole thing gets disassembled. It's a pretty logical sequence. First, the state as a rational idea is completely discredited. So the institutional need for a unifying philosophy just vanishes. And once your biggest customer disappears, what happens? The whole project gets taken apart. Philosophy breaks up into all those smaller specialized technical fields that we see in universities today.
So where does this leave us? What's the big lesson from this whole incredible story of rise and fall? I think it tells us something really important about how ideas actually work out in the real world. Ideas without an institution.
Because when you get right down to it, this grand tradition of German idealism, it didn't end because some other philosopher came along and proved it wrong in an essay. It ended because its main client, the state that so desperately needed a reason to exist, went out of business. The institutional demand just wasn't there anymore. Its whole purpose just expired.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on, right? Because this whole story suggests that the survival of our biggest, most important ideas might have less to do with how true they are, and a lot more to do with the powerful institutions that need those ideas to justify their own existence. So it makes you wonder, what are the big defining ideas of our time? Who are the institutions sponsoring them? And what happens to those ideas if those institutions suddenly go away?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.